fresh smell of autumn. What was that you said? Oh, it's 102 degrees out? Well, we can pretend, can't we? Hey guys, so I thought that I would do a fall-themed card for y'all today. Now, if you live somewhere like I do, like Texas, it probably doesn't feel at all like fall, but fall is my favorite season. I love Halloween, I love the changing of the leaves, the cooler weather, the cozy candles. So I can't take this heat anymore, and I am declaring it fall. However, before we jump into the video, I did want to make one quick announcement, and that is that I will be teaching at the upcoming Hero Art Stamp Along. Now, if you've never heard of this event before, it's basically a weekend-long virtual event where you'll be joining myself and 9 other very talented card makers who will each be teaching a class on creating a holiday card for the upcoming season. And the way the event is structured is such that you can actually stamp along and create your cards in real time with the instructor. If you're interested in joining us, we would love to have you. It's the first weekend in November, and I'll be leaving some information in the description box below if you're interested in registering. And lastly, and most importantly, if you're new here, welcome. I am so glad that you found us, and if you find yourself enjoying this video and want to see more of my content in the future, I would love for you to hit subscribe and join our community over here. And if you want to hit the like button while you're down there, that would be cool too. No pressure. But without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, howdy everyone. So as I mentioned in the intro, I am doing a fall inspired card today. Now it's still in the hundreds here in Texas, so it doesn't feel like fall, but Starbucks has their pumpkin spice lattes out, so I think that means it's officially the start of fall. So that means we can start fall cards. So I wanted to quickly review the supplies that I'll be using today. These are the main supplies that we're using today. 2 of them are from Hero Arts and 1 of them is from Waffle Flowers. This Fox stamp set is part of the brand new Hero Arts holiday release that was just released here recently. And then I'll also be using this stencil from Hero Arts. This is the Woodland Forest stencil. And then lastly, I'll be complementing it with this cover die from Waffle Flowers, the Forest Window die. So those are the main supplies, and without further ado, let's get into it. So for today's card, I want to start by creating our background, and that's because I'm going to be using some paste on today's background, so I want to make sure that we give that paste plenty of time to dry before we assemble the final card. Now, before we apply the paste, we are going to do a little bit of ink blending, and I'm using my grip mat today to hold my cardstock in place, just because I find it really helpful to keep the cardstock steady, and it helps me save on all the mint tape that I typically use to keep my cardstock in place. And one of the things I love in particular about this size grip mat is it fits perfectly right inside of my MISTI, so I can also use it for stamping. And for today's ink blend, I picked out a few classic fall colors. We have Squeezed Lemonade, Carved Pumpkin, and Barn Door, so basically a red, orange, and yellow. And I'm just going to do a little kind of sunset gradient along the back of my card. So I'm going to start by applying my Barn Door. And for that, I'm just going to use my little foam ink blending tools. I think I've decided that I want to use these foam tools for my oxides and save my brushes for my dye inks. I don't know why, I just feel like that's kind of what I've settled on. Because I have both in my collection, and I don't like to mix my oxides with my dye inks. So I think that's an easy way to kind of keep them separate. Okay, and let's go ahead and move on to the Carved Pumpkin. This is one of my favorite oranges. Now, I will admit I don't have an orange foam tip, so I am going to use this is one of my really old oxide brushes to apply the orange. And you can see with the grip mat, I don't even have to hold my paper in place. It just is held right in place, right where I need it, and I can get the entire surface area. I don't have tape holding any of the surface area captive. It looks like I might need to do a refill of my orange pad. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Squeezed Lemonade. And if you remember, the way that I do ink blending, which everyone does a little different, I like to apply the colors first, kind of in their own separate rows, and then I'll go back and blend them together. I don't know why, that's just what I found works for me. If you prefer a different method, obviously you can do that. Okay, so I've got my primary colors down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back through and blend these all together so that we have hopefully a seamless transition between each color. Okay, so I think that that is pretty good. Now, is it perfect? Of course not. But remember, as these colors sit on the paper, they're going to continue to kind of soak in and blend together. So the blend will always soften a little bit over time. So if you're not totally satisfied with how it looks, don't worry about it. You might like it in 5 minutes or so. Now I am going to go ahead and peel this guy up because next I'm going to apply paste. And quite frankly, I don't want to apply my paste on this grip mat. It does clean off, but I find it's a little more difficult to clean paste off of this than it is ink, so I'm just not going to worry about that. I'm going to actually just use a scrap piece of paper to protect my glass mat. Now, you could put the paste directly on the glass mat. I just frankly don't feel like cleaning it right now while I'm filming. But next I'm going to go ahead and grab this forest stencil from Hero Arts. And I just want to add this stencil right on top of the background that we've created. And then I'm going to grab some mint tape just to hold this guy down in place. And then I am going to grab just a tiny, well, that's not super tiny, but I am going to grab a piece just to help hold our paper in place. Okay, so now for the fun part. I am grabbing my hero paste, and there's a few different hero pastes available. This is just a white one, but you can also find it in glitter and gold. I think there's a silver one, but there's a few colors out there, and this is just a texture paste. So it's gonna look kind of like a, I don't know, almost like sour cream, frankly. And you can apply it to your cardstock using a stencil, or you can apply it directly to the cardstock and use a palette knife or a fork or plastic knife, whatever you have on hand, to create kind of textures with it. And the really cool thing is you can actually add ink to this. So if you wanted to scoop out a little bit of paste and put it in a little bowl, or maybe on an acrylic block, you can take your re-inkers and add different colors inks to it, and you can make whatever color paste you want. However, for today's card, I'm just going to use it as white because I want to create a very kind of subtle, elegant, if you will, background, and this will be a little bit translucent, so the colors will still pop through, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this over the stencil. Okay, so I think that looks pretty good for what I want. So what I'm going to do is pull off this stencil, and you do want to be careful when you're using this paste because it dries pretty quickly. And once it dries to your stencil, it can be a little difficult to get off. That's true of pretty much any paste you're going to use. So what I'm going to do is pull up this stencil, and then I'm going to go quickly wash it in the sink. You can wash them just with regular soap and water. So I'll be right back, but you can already see how gorgeous that is. Okay, so I've cleaned off my stencil and my palette knife, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. And then if you'd like to, you can always run your palette knife along the edges, just if you have any extra paste on the edges you want to clean up. Now I'm going to go ahead and set this guy off camera to dry while we continue to work. And since we used our scrap piece of paper, easy cleanup. Well, you know. Mostly easy cleanup. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is some stamping, so I'm bringing my MISTI back out, and we're going to stamp those foxes that I showed you at the beginning. And I'm a big fan of this little guy who's running, and then I also want to use the little sleepy guy. And I actually have an idea in mind for a custom sentiment, so I'm not going to use any of these sentiments today. And I'm planning to color these guys with alcohol markers, which I'm going to warn you now is not my forte. But because of that, I'm planning to heat emboss these stamps so that I don't have any issues with the ink running. Now, in one of my previous videos, I asked you all for suggestions on ink to use with alcohol markers, and a ton of you suggested the Memento Tuxedo Black. So I did get that. I was listening to y'all, and I've been using it, but I'm still having some issues with ink running when I'm using my alcohol markers. So it might just be a me problem. But I was chatting with my friend Alberto, which I'll leave his information down in the description. If you do not follow him on Instagram, you totally should. He does the most beautiful alcohol coloring I think I've ever seen. So I was asking him, and he mentioned that I might be using the wrong type of paper, which is fair because I kind of just use the cheap cardstock that you get from Joann. So I'm going to try getting some alcohol marker friendly paper and see if that solves my issue. But in the meantime, I figured I would just heat emboss. Okay, now before that dries, let me quickly put some embossing powder on. And I have this little tray that I like to use just so that I can catch any stray powder that might come out. And this is clear embossing powder from Gina K Designs. And you know what? I'm realizing I didn't put my anti-static powder on, but hopefully we're okay without it. Let's set it. Okay, so now my foxes are embossed, which means I will hopefully not have any issues with my ink running. Now, like I mentioned, I am no expert when it comes to alcohol marker coloring. I just try my best. And I also don't have that many oranges, so I'm going to do the best I can. I'll probably speed this section up just because I'm not that efficient with it. But just so you're aware, these are the colors I've picked out to use. Some oranges, a yellow, red, or that's not red, what is that? Brown, and a neutral gray. Wish me luck. Okay, that is about as good as it's going to get, folks. I don't think it's terrible, but like I said, my alcohol coloring is very basic. I know just enough to be dangerous, but I think this will do. And let's go ahead and cut these guys out. And fortunately, I do have the coordinating dies for these stamps. I'm kind of a princess when it comes to that. I love to have the coordinating dies because I do not like to fussy cut, y'all, fun fact. But I am going to use some mint tape to hold these guys in place just because, you know, after you do all that coloring, heaven forbid you don't want to accidentally cut them in half or something, right? And I'm interested, does anyone have the magnetic plate? Oh, you know what? This is not even the right die. 1 second. Like I was saying, does anyone have the magnetic plate for your die cutting machine? I've been interested in getting one just to, again, save on some of the tape that I use to hold my dies in place. But my clear cutting plates are often warped just from so much use. So I'm curious if the magnetic plate, does it still work and help you even if your clear plates are a little warped? Let me know in the comments. I would love to know. Speaking of, I'm going to go ahead and run this guy through our die cutting machine. Okay, easy peasy. I actually just got a new top cutting plate, so it looks very nice and clean and shiny, doesn't it? Nope, that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and set these guys aside, maybe up in this little corner. And let's move on to the next step. Okay, so next I actually think I want to work on our sentiment. And remember, I had mentioned I wanted to do a custom sentiment. And I cut this little sleepy fox out because the sentiment I want to use is "Wake Me Up When September Ends." Which, if you are a fan of alternative emo music, whatever you want to call it, from the 2000s, you'll know that that is a very popular song by the artist Green Day. As you all know, I get very inspired by music and sometimes will incorporate lots of lyrics into my cards. Especially if I'm sending it to someone who I know has a similar music taste as me. But I felt that specifically the "Wake Me Up When September Ends" sentiment is so fitting because living in Texas, you know, it's September, and I know fall is coming, and I know Starbucks has their pumpkin spice lattes out, but it is still hot, y'all. So please, I've had enough of it. Wake me up when September ends, when the temperatures are finally cooling off a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this guy through my Cricut. If you're curious about how I do my custom sentiments, I do have a video that goes over step by step how I do it, and I will leave that down in the description for you. Okay folks, we have a sentiment. I'm going to go ahead and peel this guy up carefully. And there we are. Wake me up when September ends. And we can go ahead and put our Mr. Cricut away. And now we just have one more final piece we need to make, and then we can start to assemble the card. So as you'll recall, I showed you this cover die from Waffle Flowers. This is the forest window die, and I think that it will be just the perfect framing for the background that we made. And then I'm going to grab a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch piece of cardstock, so just your normal A2 size. And I'm going to center this guy straight in the middle and just cut it out with our machine. Okay, and I am going to tape him down just because I feel like when you have something so large like this and you're trying to center it, it can be kind of obvious when it's off center. So I want to have just a little extra insurance, you know, that this is truly centered. So I'm going to add just a tiny bit of tape. And then one note I'll make here, so if you're applying tape like this, and 99% of the time your mint tape is not going to stick to your cardstock, but if you run it through your die cutting machine, there's a lot of pressure, right? So sometimes the mint tape can get stuck and it'll peel off that top layer of your cardstock. It's rare, but it does happen. So if you're ever taping your dies down to your cardstock like this before running it through your machine, when possible, try to apply the tape to the portion of the paper that's not going to be present after the cutout. Does that make sense? Like, I'm cutting out this middle part, so I'm putting the tape on the middle part. Just in case it does stick and peels a layer of the cardstock off, it'll be off this cutout portion that I don't actually need. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's run them through. Okay, and there you have it. We have our cutout. And look, that didn't even stick, which is good because I want to use this to also create some leaves. So the cool thing about this cover die is, yes, you get this cover, which has some really cool looking trees on it, but it also comes with this die that cuts out some leaves. So what I'm going to do is use my scrap here to cut out some leaves, and then I'm going to color those with my markers, and that way we can adorn the front with some fall leaves as well. Okay, we have leaves. It probably would have been wise of me to color the paper before actually cutting the leaves out. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and just try to color some of these leaves with these markers right now. So let me get to coloring. Okay, so we are on the home stretch now. We have our fall leaves, we have our foxes, our sentiment, we have our beautiful cover plate, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab that background that we created. Now I do think that it could use a little bit more drying time, but I'm just going to be careful with it as we assemble the card, but you may want to give it a little longer to dry, just a heads up. So what I want to do first is I want to go ahead and apply our cover die to our background. And to do that, I'm just going to use a little bit of foam tape just to give it a little bit of dimension so that we can add the other elements behind it. So I'm just using 1/4 of an inch foam tape because I do have some pretty thin margins here. If your foam tape is larger, like a 1/2 inch, you can always cut it, you know, lengthwise in half, but just be careful not to get your scissors too sticky. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, I will be teaching at the upcoming Hero Arts Stamp-Along event. If you're interested in getting those type of announcements sooner, I actually do have a newsletter that you can sign up for on my website. I'll leave that linked down in the description, but if you just go to my website, ralphtyndall.com, and if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the homepage, you'll see the section where you can sign up for my newsletter. And I do have some very exciting announcements coming up, which I am stoked about. So I'm just applying my 1/4 inch foam tape to the edges. I'm almost done here. You can see I don't really measure, so I'm just going in and filling in little gaps. Okay, I think that should be good. Now I probably would recommend letting this dry completely before finishing up your card. But since I'm filming, I'm just going to go ahead and finish it up. And to align this card front, I am going to use the Scor-Pal trick where you put your bottom layer up in the corner, and then you should be able to easily line up your top layer using that right angle, just like so. Okay, and then next I think I want to go ahead and add my leaves to the card. So I'm just going to take these leaves and kind of sprinkle them on the trees here on the front. And for that, I think I'm just going to use my Gina K Designs liquid glue and my gem picker. I'll probably go ahead and speed this portion up for y'all. Okay, I didn't use all the leaves, but I think that that looks pretty good to me. I don't want it to become too distracting. And then all we have to do is add our foxes and our sentiment. So I really want to see this fox kind of in the background, so I'm going to apply him using tape runner. Actually, no, I'm not. I want to use liquid glue just in case I need a little extra wiggle time for him. Okay, so I'm just going to carefully kind of slide him in behind our cover die. Actually, you know what? I might cut a little bit of his tail off. I hope that you won't be able to see this. Sorry, I promise no foxes were harmed in the making of this card. I'm going to move him up, but then I think that right there should be pretty good. Okay, yep, I like that. And then I want to have this little guy just kind of sleeping down here in the forefront in the corner. Now I can't decide if I want to use foam tape and pop him up a little bit or if that would be a little overkill. I'm not sure. I think I kind of like him just laying there without the foam tape, and that'll be easier to mail anyway, right? So I'm going to grab my liquid glue. I kind of like the idea of him hanging off the edge just a tiny bit. And he's the real star of the show because he is what ties in our sentiment, Wake Me Up When September Ends. And I do think I want to add some foam tape to this guy. Alright, let's go ahead and take off the backing. And then I think I want to put this guy just kind of floating at the top. Hopefully he doesn't look too crazy just floating out there in the ether. No, I think that actually will look pretty good. See, is that centered? I think it's centered. Sure. Okay, perfect. And then it kind of looks like he's looking up at the sentiment a little bit, right? So last but not least, of course, we have to go ahead and adhere this guy to our card base. So I'm just going to take an 8.5 by 5.5 sheet of cardstock and score him right in the middle at 4 1/4. And that is going to create our standard A2 card base. For those of you that aren't familiar, that's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches once folded. Since I am a little concerned about our background not being totally dry, I think I'm going to adhere this guy using liquid glue, just because that'll give us a really nice strong hold. And again, you can use the scoreboard trick here when you put this guy on. And another trick in general when you're adhering your top panel to a card base, I would always suggest, if you're using the scoreboard trick, or even if you're not, to line up the corner that is on the side with the crease. That way, if you're over or under, you can always trim off this edge that isn't creased, but you can't really trim the edge that is creased. Does that make sense? So whenever you're lining these layers up, I would always line up with that edge. Okay guys, and with that I think we have completed our fall Wake Me Up When September Ends card. Doing an ink blended background like we did and then adding some hero paste with a stencil I think is just such a simple way to take your card up a notch. So I hope you'll keep that in your back pocket this holiday season. And if you're looking for more holiday card inspiration, I would love for you to join us at the Stamp Along in November. And if you're new here, I would love for you to go ahead and hit subscribe and join our community here on YouTube. And if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out and I would super appreciate that. And most importantly, I hope that you have a great rest of your day and I will catch you on the next one. Bye y'all.